Overview of the home buying process. All right, here we go. So in this video, I'm going to show you the home buying process. I'm going to cross compare it with a Tennessee residential state purchase and sale agreement. We're going to scroll through this as we go. We're going to talk about a couple of different things, and I'm going to acclimate you and make you a semi-expert on the home buying process here in Tennessee. So you guys sit tight and enjoy what you're about to learn. This is going to make you better. All right, so let's jump in. So first and foremost, whenever I meet with a client and we sit down at the office or in a comfortable setting somewhere where I can share a computer screen, there are multiple slides in this presentation that I go over with my clients, and we communicate about various situations that we might run into while we're under contract on a property. But in this video, I'm going to try to keep it short. I'm going to try to keep it tight. I'm going to try to refrain from putting you to sleep. So hang in there with me, enjoy this video. So let's get started. So let's visualize where we're at right now in the process, okay? We're gonna pretend like you watching this video, you're sitting in the office with me. We're sitting across from each other. We're sitting in our big comfy chairs. We're looking up at the big screen TV that's got the internet connected to it. What we're doing right now is we're doing a get to know each other session. It's also known as a buyer consultation, okay? And I call this the home buying 101 whenever we get together with my clients. And it's especially useful for first-time home buyers, but I also like to go over it with people who haven't purchased in a while, or maybe who haven't experienced some of the same things in their home buying or selling experience that they have that I offer. In their past, I like for all of my clients to have an expectation of what to expect whenever we're working together. So that's what this is, right? So let's visualize it. You're sitting across from me in the chair. I've got the MLS pulled up. I'm ready to look at properties online with you so that we can discuss, some of the things that you really love about homes, some of the things that are deal breakers, and, everything else in between. So that's what we would be doing. We'd be doing what's called a buyer consultation, where we're sitting down and we're looking at things all the way down to the fine, minute details so that I can really get a perfect understanding of what you're looking for. That way, whenever I'm going about my day to day, I time block for handpicking homes for my clients, which is something that a lot of agents don't do. A lot of agents will assign you to a saved home search, and they'll just let them roll off. I like to get a little more involved than that because, obviously, maybe in the future, whenever we have artificial intelligence, AI may have the ability to, look at the photos for us and, handpick those homes based on what you're looking for. But right now, I got to be the human that does that for us, and I like doing it. I enjoy it. So that's going to be our consultation. We're going to talk about what you're looking for in detail. You're going to introduce me to the lender if you're not working with my preferred lender, which I don't recommend. But at the end of the day, I can't force you to work with the people that I feel the most confident in. So I'll ask you to introduce me to those guys, share that contact information, and we'll just get to know each other a little bit. We'll talk about life experiences. We'll see if we have chemistry to work together. And at the end of that little communication session, it normally takes about 5 minutes or so. If somebody doesn't feel comfortable and it's kind of awkward, honestly, I don't mean it to sound arrogant, but I give these folks the opportunity, to say, you know what, you I'm not really feeling the chemistry. You know what I mean? Maybe we are not best suited for working together because I would rather us know that in the front end when we're there in the office rather than, getting later on down the road and there not being, established lines of trust and not allowing me to be your real estate guide. If I can't be that person for you, then I would rather you find somebody that you more so connected with that could give you a better experience. Because at the end of the day, I'm doing this for you guys. I'm providing a service and I do believe in myself, but I want you to be happy through and through. So with that being said, we're consulting, we're getting to know each other. Hopefully we're joking and laughing, maybe drinking some coffee and, just kind of enjoying each other's company. And then we move into the business side of it, right? So let's start with that. So the business side of it, your custom home search. So whenever you become a client and we leave the office, the first thing that I do is I like to set up custom home searches on the available software platforms that we have here with the Middle T and Home Expert team whenever we leave the office. I can set them up directly from the MLS. We can set them up directly from middletnhomexpert.com or homes for sale columbiatn.com, Real Scout. I mean, we literally have 5 or 6 mechanisms, software mechanisms that we use to make sure that our clients are getting properties as fast as possible so that our buyers can be the first buyers to the property and we can craft the best offer and get you under contract. So the custom home search is the kickoff. That's where everything starts. And I let my clients know I can set that up for you where you're going to get instant notifications, or I can set it up to where you get daily notifications. That way your email inbox isn't getting, just absolutely blasted. But the other thing that we do is kind of a Swiss Army knife approach. We'll set somebody up on one of the software platforms with a very specific custom home search where, I mean, you shouldn't be getting an email every 15 minutes, but we do set it up on instant. And it's got, the number of stories that you're looking for. It's got, the size of the yard, the square footage, number of beds and baths. I can specify whether or not there's a fence or a pool. If it's farm or equestrian property, there are things that I can include in the home search for that. So one of the home searches that I like to set up, one of the custom home searches that I like to set up is custom tailored and specific to what my buyer is looking for. That way, when they see that alert come through, the red flags and the ears perk up and everything just, the world stops. It's like, oh my goodness, all right, the alert's here. Let's check this out. This is important. This is it. This is what we're looking for. So you got one of those, but then I also like to use another one of the software mechanisms to create what I call the net casting search, something that's a little more broad and open. That way, if a house hits the market that is absolutely gorgeous, it doesn't slip through the cracks. It doesn't slip through the net. Our net still catches it. That net custom home search grabs it and still gives you the ability to go in there and go take a look at it. And that's really important, because look, at the end of the day, especially when you're a first time home buyer, whenever you're out looking at homes, oftentimes some of your tastes and some of your preferences can change whenever you're in the home buying process. So it's really important to kind of keep an open mind. Don't marry an idea because one, the market may not present that perfect idea for 6 months, and you may be waiting for a long time before that property hits the market. But also, too, you may realize something about yourself or your significant other, or that you may be able to live with, and you may actually end up liking it more than what you envisioned in your head. So and I've had that happen to people, with clients that I followed up with after they closed, and people who have told me, like, I really didn't think I would like this built-in ironing board in this 1978 brick ranch as much as I like it, but I use it like every other day, so just little things like that. We like to keep the net open and use one of the searches to catch some of those properties that we really weren't expecting to catch. You know what I mean? So that's your custom home search. So I let my clients know. Step one, those searches are going to be rolling out left and right. So as I'm hand picking homes and as the automated home searches are sending you properties, what we're going to do from that point is we're going to shift into narrowing the list and, making lists of homes and identifying ones that they want to go look at, right? So that's what we do. So we narrow the list. You tell me what your schedule looks like. If you've got, 3 hours open on Sunday, we'll schedule, as many homes as we can schedule within that time frame. And then from there, we get out and we go take a look at the homes, right? Really important. We got to go look at every house that you even think you might be remotely interested in. So we fight the good fight. Now, depending on the market that you're in, you either may or you may not have a lot of time to go get out and see that property. So depending on the market that I'm in, I'm either going to be aggressive, pushing you as my client because I care about you, like, hey, we need to get out and go see this house, quick. I'm also going to be aware of the stats. I'm also going to know what's going on. If you choose a home in a neighborhood that is a very fast moving neighborhood, but the neighborhoods around it, let's just say, the neighborhood that you pick, the homes are going under contract in 2 days, but the neighborhoods around it are going under contract in 14 days. I don't average those two out. If I look at the neighborhood that is in high demand, I'll let you know this is a high demand neighborhood for the area. We need to go see it today because they're probably going to get an offer on it pretty quickly. right? That's really important information. So you guys will learn that the middle 10 home experts and we're like very stat driven. We're kind of nerdy whenever it comes to that stuff. We really like looking at the stats. So that's definitely going to be something that we do with you guys as we're working together. And hopefully, if you guys decide not to work with us, you're working with an agent that does those things, because it's really important to have the knowledge whenever you get ready to make offers. Okay. So we're looking at homes, right? Let's visualize where we're at. We've already met at the office. You've got your searches set up. We're narrowing lists. We're viewing homes. All of a sudden, we walk in that house that's the one. Oh, man. And you just stop and you're like, oh, my goodness, Byron, this is the one. Like, I love this house. Please, whatever you can do to get me in this house, please get me in this house. Now, not everybody's like that. But at the same time, here are the steps that we take once we identify a home that our clients really like. Okay, now this is important. Okay, whenever we identify a home that our clients really like, I walk through the house with a little more of a magnifying glass than I do some of the other homes. Like I'll go around, I'll flush toilets, I'll run faucets. I'll heel check the floors to kind of see, if it's, especially if it's a really old house, like a 1930 or a 1940, I'll kind of heel check and bounce on the floors a little bit to see if they're giving. I'll go outside, look at the roofs. I'll crawl in the crawl space as long as it's not like a soaking wet, sopping wet day. I'll crawl in the crawl space. I'll look at the piers underneath the house. I'll look at the insulation. I'll look at, vapor barriers on the ground in the crawl space. Just everything basically you're picking up what I'm putting down. I try to get as much intel on the house as I'm walking through it as I can. And I try to relay that information over to my client in terms of things that I know that the home inspector will mention in a general home inspection report whenever that time comes for the property to be inspected by a general inspector. We try to give our clients as much foresight as possible, right? I want you to be aware. I don't want there to be surprises. Surprises are always a bad thing in real estate. Remember that. We don't ever like surprises. So we try to walk through and we try to get as much intel. We take notes, mental notes, cell phone, iPhone notes, everything that we can do. So we walk through it with a magnifying glass. I'm looking for water stains and everything else, right? So we magnifying glass the house. Okay. After that, you still love it. After that, what I've got to do is I've got to get you the rest of the intel, right? I've got to get you the rest of the knowledge and wisdom on this house. So I try to get a hold of the Tennessee property condition disclosure, or I get a hold of the property condition disclosure in Georgia, whatever the property condition is for that state. That disclosure is supposed to be the form that the seller uses to list all of the latent and material defects of the property. If there's ever been like a fire, if there's ever been a flood or anything like that, if it's ever been hit by a tornado and an insurance claim had to get filed, it's supposed to be listed in that property condition disclosure. It's to the seller's best knowledge. Now, sometimes the sellers, just bought the house last year and they don't know. But at the same time, it gives us one leg to use to go out there and go try to get as much information on the property as possible. So that's really important, right? We get the rest of the disclosures, including the lead-based paint and, any other thing that we can get our hands on in terms of the disclosures for the house itself. And then I also send over the tax record for my clients so that they can see when the seller bought it, how much they paid for the property, and whether or not the property is in a floodplain. The Tennessee tax records, and I know a lot of other courthouse retrieval systems, CRS or MLS tax systems out there will have the FEMA floodplain information in the tax record, which is really useful. I love that they did that. So I can send that over to those guys. That's really important in Georgia, where our Savannah team is located, because obviously, we're lower in elevation there, and there are more risks for flood, and flood insurance is oftentimes required. So we can look at the zoning designation, the FEMA floodplain designation, to see how severe in a floodplain it is, so that we can try to gauge, what the flood insurance may look like, right? So we do that as well. And another thing that the tax record is really good for is it allows me to zoom in on an aerial satellite image of the property, and it actually has little numbers that are assigned that are the feet for each point that was shot, according to the tax and Register of Deeds office with that city or county municipal. So it tells you how much, road frontage that you've got if you're looking at a land parcel. So those little numbers in the satellite aerial is really useful to kind of give you a broad overview of the property lines. Now, I want to remind everybody really quick, this is a caveat. It's not a survey, okay? Those numbers and that map is not a survey, but it's pretty close. I believe that I remember hearing somebody teach that it was within about 15 feet of the property line, which is from a satellite aerial image is pretty good if you think about it. I mean, it at least gives you a broad overview of where the property lines are. If you're in a neighborhood, and you're in a subdivision or something like that, and there's already a privacy fence and all that stuff built, you're probably not ever going to have to worry about that. I say probably. Weird things happen, but you'll probably never have to worry about it. But that's, we send them the tax record, right? And then of course, what else do we send? We send comps, right? And we try to find at least 3 really comparable comps. And what is a comp? A comp is a comparable, right? If you're a first-time home buyer, I'll teach you really quick. So a comparable is if I've got a 1,500 square foot house that's a brick ranch that was built in 1968 and it has a half-acre yard, I'm going to try to find as many properties within a quarter mile, maybe a half mile. It depends on how rural and how much housing density there is in that area. But we use a bubble around the property, a radius around the property, to try to find as many close comparables as we can. And then we try to find as many recent comparables, recent sales. It's a sales comparison overview. We try to find as many recent sales as we can. Now, again, in rural areas, especially if you're dealing with properties that have, 10 acres and they're 3,000 square feet, and, there's probably that house was probably custom built for that area, so it's a little more difficult. You got to get a little more creative, and sometimes you got to expand that comparable search a little bit. You've got to go back a little further in time, and then sometimes too, you got to get more creative than that. When I'm listing a property, sometimes I've got to go in there and I've got to measure the appreciation rate and calculate averages and really get down to the nitty gritty of what we think the home is worth. But whenever we start doing that much homework and we've really got to delve in that deep, oftentimes it's a really good idea to leave that responsibility to the appraiser. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Obviously, you see the appraisal checkbox down here, the appraisal box. We'll talk about appraisals in a minute and educate you on that. But yeah, I try to get over comps so that you can see what the sales price, whether or not the sales price is verified or not, if it's accurate or if the seller's just out of their mind. Okay, so we do that. And then the last thing that I like to send my clients is I like to send them stats. Okay, 2020 COVID market was a lot different than the 2021 post-COVID market. And even here in 2022, it's July 11th, 2022. The market right now has a looming recession going on with it. The Fed has jacked the rates up, raising the interest rates, and it's changed the market, the housing market, from what it was last year. So even now, for 3 years straight, we've had 3 different markets. It's been it's been pretty interesting. So I like to send over the stats to my clients so that they can understand, okay, like what's the average days on market? How long are these houses sitting on the market on average? That's really important. What's the sales price to list price ratio? If houses are being listed at 200 on average, are they selling for 210? Are they selling for 190? Well, that's really going to give us a good idea of what to offer if we need to ask for closing costs or some of those other things. It gives us a dollar amount to set some sort of expectation so that we know what the norm is for that area. Now, there are unicorns, right, where the house that is on the market, that was just put on the market, is just a knockout property that you can look at a house and tell whether or not it's the best house in its class or not. If it's completely updated and if it's just separate from the bunch, in the same price range, then you can probably rest assured that house is going to sell quickly, at least somewhat quickly, depending on the market. But we'll communicate that. We'll work on that together. That's the reason why I'm here with you in the first place, and we'll work together as a team. But I definitely like to send the stats over to my client. Okay, so once we do that, I send all that information over, and I give them time to digest it. So once you've had time to process it and you look over everything, at that point now you should be a very educated offer maker. a very educated buyer, right? So we can, jump on a conference call really fast, and or with your significant other, we'll have a team call, in other words, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about some of the terms of your offer, like what you want the sales price to be. What remains with the property, obviously, if there are kitchen appliances and a washer and dryer, if there's a ring Nest, or excuse me, a Ring video camera system that's mounted to the property. Does that remain? Well, I don't know. We got to negotiate that, right? So there are things that we need to include in the contract that we need to make sure that we consider, that we need to be aware of professionally, so that we make sure that we put those items that remain, that you want to remain with the property, like the shed out back that's not attached to the property. If you want that shed to remain, we need to make sure it's written in the contract so that you have it in writing, so that you're protected legally in case that gets removed prior to closing. Because if it's not in the contract and it gets removed, there's nothing that we can do about it at that point. Especially if you've signed the closing paperwork, it's finished at that point. And then two items that will not remain. There are properties out there that have, unfortunately, garbage and stuff like that, and debris on the premises. They may have old cars that are broken down on the lot. We are in the country, and we're here in Tennessee. We're next to GM, so there's a lot of folks here that can work on cars. There should be items that do not remain in the contract as well. That way, you got that listed. And then leased items. What would be leased? A propane tank, right? You could potentially lease a gas tank if you were way out in the country. What's something else that might be leased? Well, maybe the home alarm security system. If it's not transferable, if it's not transferring with the seller to their next home purchase, that may be something that we could build into the contract, right? That technically speaking has a lease on it. If there's hardware that came with it, we could ask for that to remain, and then we can put in there the leased items that we want to remain. Fuel, believe it or not, can get fairly expensive, depending on the size of the propane tank on that property, so that needs to be addressed in the contract. Things that you don't even think of, right? And then of course, we've got price, and right here, how much LTV you're going to have. If it's a 3.5% FHA loan, for example, you're going to have 96.5 here. That's how much you're going to be financing. With 3.5% down, you'll be financing the other 96.5% of it, right? So we'll have that. If you were able to come across some sort of owner financing or something like that, you could check other here and do owner financing or whatever. So you've got that here. If you're paying all cash and you don't have a financing contingency, you would check that. So we kind of run through all this. In other words, you've got the appraisal contingency. I could really go over this RF 401, this purchase and sale agreement, with you in detail. But I want to give you the overview of the home buying process. I may make that actually in another video. That way you guys are comfortable with the Tennessee state contracts, and I'll probably do one for Georgia as well. That way you guys are comfortable with the contracts. And as our home expert company acquires new teams in new states, obviously we'll update the videos, and, we'll kind of go from there and expand that. But title expenses, who we're going to be closing with, the number of days for the earnest money, that's really important. Our closing date, I'm just going to skim through here, guys. Our closing date, how you want your names to appear legally with the Register of Deeds office in that municipal. Obviously inspections, that's really important, right? The inspections shall include what does it not include? Excludes. We normally say nothing here. We like for the inspection to include everything in the real estate. That means sheds and everything else that come along with it. So all this literature is really important, so we've got a set number of days here. This blank would be filled in with the number of days that we want to utilize for our inspection period. Normally we either put 7 or 10 there. In really hot markets like there was last year in 2021, sometimes you only get 3 or 5, and the general home inspectors they have to hustle to get out there, you know what I mean? But then you got a resolution period. Your resolution period is the number of days after the inspection period has ended that you utilize to negotiate in some way, shape, or form. And you're either negotiating closing costs, a reduction on the price, or repairs, right? So we have a set number of days that we come to a final agreement on what that negotiation is going to end up at. and that is what the resolution period is. So we would have the set number of days there for that. And then, if you were waiving inspections or if you were just doing pass fail only, those were really popular last year. The market was so hot that you basically could only do pass fail. A lot of folks were just waiving inspections altogether. So there are check boxes for that too. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. Final inspection. A final inspection is your final walkthrough, basically. So we set the number of days prior to the closing date that the seller and buyer agree on in terms of doing the final walkthrough, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. I don't want to go over that too much. Home protection plan, home warranty. Home warranties obviously are different than homeowners insurance. If that's being gifted, I gift that actually to a lot of my first-time home buyers whenever I'm not contributing in some other way to the transaction financially or something like that. If I'm not taking care of a home inspection for them or something like that, I'll always try to gift my clients something of value, like a warranty or an inspection or something like that can, help them in the transaction. But we would put that information here under the home protection plan, or we would waive it. And then a little further on down, we've got, exhibits and addenda or special stipulations. So if we were including some sort of paperwork in the state contract, and Georgia has this too, the exhibits and addenda and then the special stipulations. If we were including something in the paperwork, then we would have that under exhibits and addenda, like FHA, for example. If you're doing an FHA loan, they require an FHA addendum to be included with that loan type. And it's got to be signed by both parties. So we would include that information here on line 481. And then in special stipulations, if we were asking for closing costs. So special stipulations are any extra verbiage like a sale of home contingency. If you're a seller and you've got a home to sell before you can close on the purchase of this one in this contract, we would put that sale of home contingency under special stipulations, for example, or we would ask for closing costs or, some other sort of added verbiage or literature that we wanted in the contract. We would put in special stipulations. And then we time limit our offer, right? We don't want to give the seller, 3 weeks to answer us. We hope that they make a decision pretty quick, and we hope that we're the one that they choose, right? And then we all sign off, and then we're good to go. So once we've gone over that together, once you're my client, and again, visualizing where we're at, you've got that house that you're really in love with. We go over that together. And, we put the terms in. I introduce you to my transaction coordinator. She sends out the rest of the disclosures and everything else so that we can get all of that signed with our offer. That way we're not constantly pestering you during the contract process about signing paperwork. We try to hit it all at once. We get it all out of the way. And then we present the offer. Okay, so one really important thing that we always do is we present a pre-approval letter with our offers. There is a huge difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualification. Okay, a pre-qualification is basically just a credit check where they've gone in there, you've submitted the application, you've told them what your income is by typing in a couple of blank spaces on their application, and they've run your credit background and they say, all right, you're pre-qualified. Well, you're not really approved for the loan until two things happen, until you get pre-approved and you get what's called real loan approval, which we'll talk about later. And a pre-approval takes place whenever you submit your tax returns and or W-2s and bank statements. They get the VOE, verification of employment, and some of those other things. We like to do that up front with our clients. That way, whenever we send your offer over in this phase right here, we let the seller and the listing agent know. We let the listing agent know, listen, we have done our due diligence on the financing on the front end. You can rest assured that if you're working with us, we're not going to have issues on the financing. Okay, so emergencies do happen, of course, and we've got contingencies built in for that. But we let the listing agent know we're serious. Here we are. We're who you want to work with. In other words, we make it as much of a no-brainer as possible. So that's what we do, and then we send our offer over. All right. So let's pause. Okay, and we wait. And that's the hardest part. The hardest part is waiting. You guys are going to want to text me 1,000 times. Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? But as soon as I get an answer formally from the listing agent, I will definitely let you guys know. Now, one of the things that I left out actually whenever we're presenting the offer is I'll call the listing agent, obviously. Like I told you, I'll submit the pre-approval letter, right? I call the listing agent to make sure there are no multiple offers and things of that nature. I left that out, and I should have included that, so please excuse me. But we communicate with the listing agent in that regard. So we wait for an answer, okay? And waiting is the hardest part. Once I have an answer, and your offer is accepted, obviously the seller can accept, counter, or reject your offer. Okay, so if they reject it, you guys know we just move on and we go find another house. If they accept it, we continue moving forward, and we'll talk about that in a second. A counter is a formal document. It's an RF 651 that gets sent over by one party to the other, and what it stands, there's actually literature in the counter paperwork that states that buyer and seller agree to all other terms in this original offer right here, except for the following in this counter. And it's a large blank paragraph space to where you can put a bunch of literature in there. And then from there, we go in there and, we say, they can potentially counter back like line 39 and 40. If they countered back $5,000 higher than our price, they would say line 39 and 40, sales price to be X amount of dollars. So they specifically reference the line. They're supposed to anyway. That's how we do counters. We like to do formal counters and reference the line numbers that we wish to change from the original agreement. Not every party does that. Not every agent requires that they do that. So we'll go over that together, but they can counter you, in other words, is the point. All other terms that were in the original agreement are agreeable except for what is listed in the counter. So just remember that if you ever get a counter, or if you ever want to send a counter, make sure you be thorough, in other words. All right. So now we've countered back and forth. You've got an accepted offer. Okay. An accepted offer is not the same thing as a bound offer, right? An accepted offer means the buyer and seller have both agreed to the terms and they have checked the accepted checkbox and both parties have signed. But the last agent in the transaction, this is very important, to see the accepted agreement has to bind it. So if I'm representing you and you're the buyer, and the seller sent us counter one and we didn't like it, and we countered back, they would send us a counter two, right? They would either accept it or send us a counter two. So let's just say they counter two'd us, right? They changed counter one. They said, we kind of like these terms. Here's what we're going to keep from counter one. Here's what we're going to change from counter one. And they put all of that information in counter two. Okay. And they send it over and they sign it, and the accept, counter, or reject boxes are not checked, right? You agree as a buyer that, hey, I like these terms. I can live with this. We accept it. Okay. We check the accepted checkbox and y'all sign it. Okay. Now remember, the seller has already signed it, right? Now you're signing it as a buyer and you're accepting it. That's not a binding agreement. So I've seen it because I know you guys have signed the acceptance, but the other agent hasn't seen that it's been accepted yet formally. They have to see that legally, because for legal reasons, there are a number of things that can happen if the earnest money if the earnest money is not turned in time, or if something happens. There's a huge difference between an accepted and a bound agreement. So I'll send it back over to the other side, and I'll stay on that agent about getting that bound agreement back to me ASAP, because we don't want another offer to come in $5,000 or $10,000 higher than ours between the time that the offer is accepted and bound, and then the sellers back out on us and go with that other offer. You see what I mean? Like, time is of the essence, and you're going to hear that a lot in real estate across the country and across the world. So we're going to stay on them, and we're going to try to, get that bound agreement to get you under contract ASAP. Okay, so that's really important. All right, so bound contract. All right, good job. Okay, now we're legally and officially under contract, right? So now what happens? Oh my goodness, then the realization sets in. You're like, I'm about to buy a $250,000 house. That is so much money. I am freaking out, guys. No, this is the fun part. This is the fun part. This is where home ownership actually takes place. So in here, this is where we fight the good fight. Okay, so there are some checkpoints that have to take place before we can officially and legally close, because now you've got a legally binding contract, right? Well, what do you think the first thing that has to happen is? Well, all of the parties involved in the transaction they all need a copy of the contract, right? That seems so simple, but oftentimes that doesn't happen, and the lender doesn't get the contract until 2 weeks after they've gone down, and he or she hasn't ordered the appraisal yet because they didn't know that they were under contract. So um, fortunately, I've got a transaction coordinator who is incredible, who is also my wife, who sends out a next steps moving forward email, and also utilizes Google Calendar to mark our deadlines and give you a guideline on what happens next, like what each of the most immediate checkpoints are that we need to meet. Number one, number two, and number three in order of importance. Okay, so she sends out that email. Next steps moving forward, you'll get it. So the first thing that has to take place is the trust money. So the next steps moving forward email goes out. We circulate the contract to all of the parties that are involved, all of our network, basically everybody that's going to be working on your transaction to help get you closed. That's the title companies, the lender, the listing agent, and the seller, and all of those folks. We're going to communicate in a huge circle with all of those guys to make sure that everybody has what they need to get started. To get started on working towards your closing. Okay, so that happens first. Okay. Also on day zero or day one, we order the inspections if you advise us to order the inspections. Now, remember, we can work with any inspector that you want us to. It's your choice ultimately at the end of the day. We have people that we trust that we've worked with in different areas around Tennessee and around Georgia that we have a lot of confidence in. So if you don't give us a preference, we will default to one of those inspectors because we trust their work and we know they've done a good job in the past. So we'll get in touch with those guys. We'll get you scheduled. We'll go over some of those costs. Now, what do those costs look like? So here in Tennessee and in Georgia, um, the normal that obviously the cost of an inspection scales with the size of the property, and that includes square footage and acreage. But standard house in America is about 1,800 to 2,200 square feet. So I would say, an inspection, a general home inspection on a property that size is usually somewhere in the vicinity of about $500. And that here it is, July 2022. So I would just think $500. Okay, and that's rounding up. It could be a little cheaper than that. But that general home inspection, I always tell everybody, especially my first time home buyers, if you're listening to this, when you get that home inspection report back, don't freak out. Like, don't be surprised if that inspection report is 75 pages. The general home inspector's job is to look in great detail at that house, and make sure that they're listing as many things in that report as possible, really because that's their job and they don't want to get sued. Uh, but at the same time, they try to, again, give you as much foresight about what you're getting into as possible. And that's what they're there for. You're working with the home inspector as a partner. So don't ever be afraid to communicate. Don't ever be afraid to show up at the inspection and visit and be, not visit, but be there for it, and walk through the house with the home inspector. You kind of want to give them some space sometimes, especially when they're crawling through the 114-degree attic or the wet crawl space. Give them their space and kind of let them do their thing. But just remember that the home inspector that you hired that person. They're your friend in this transaction. So communicate with them. Don't ever be shy about that. But don't be surprised if that report comes back and it's 75 pages long. Okay, it's going to be very thorough. If it's not thorough, if you're somebody out there that's not working with the Middle TN or Coastal GA home experts, if you're not working with us as a team and you get a home inspection report back that looks like it was typed up on Microsoft Word, I've seen that. If it just doesn't look professional, then what I would recommend is I would recommend communicating with your agent and letting them know that you would like to do an extension on the inspection period. You'd like to extend it maybe 3 or 4 days and hire somebody else that does a better job on your report. That is so important. Man, I can't tell you how important that is. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to look back on that situation wishing that you could have done it differently. You still have time when you're in the moment. Sometimes you get pressured and you feel like you're holding everybody up. Listen, it's okay. You're about to spend however many dollars on this property, everybody can slow down just a little bit and make sure that you've got all the resources and information that you need on the property to make sure that you feel comfortable about moving forward. Okay, that's really important. And if you're working with me, I work for you, and if I sense that you're not comfortable, I'm going to ask you about it. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to figure something out that makes you comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable with moving forward, then we need to get down to the bottom of that situation. Okay, so it's all good. In other words, woosah, as they say. So woosah in the moment, and we'll go over the general home inspection report together, right? So let's visualize where we're at. So we've gone under contract, we've got a binding agreement, the contract's been sent to all of the people that are involved in the transaction. They're all aware that they need to get started on it, so they all get to work. The next steps moving forward email has been sent out, and you've gotten it. So you've got your playbook. You know what you need to do in order. Step 1, step 2, step 3. The inspections get ordered. Okay, and now we're at the inspections. By this point, we're probably on like day 5 to day 8 in the contract. Normally, the home inspectors get out there pretty quick. Okay, so we haven't really been under contract that long. You've probably already turned your earnest money in to the title company or the attorney's office, or whoever you're working with. You've probably turned your earnest money in already, your good faith money, and I've got a blog post on that. What is earnest money? And I kind of break down earnest money, and I talk about some of the things that are illegal and what your earnest money can't be used for. So be on the lookout for that. That's at ByronHatcherRealtor.com, where I go into earnest money a little bit more and I explain that. But it's also known as good faith or trust money. It's a deposit down on the contract, basically down on the house up front, that shows the seller that you are operating in good faith and that you're serious about purchasing the home. Now, we'll come back to inspections in a second. So the earnest money is used. It has to be utilized in the transaction. It doesn't just disappear. It actually, I tell all of my clients, when you take your earnest money check to the attorney or title company, that money gets deposited like the next day or the day after. It gets deposited up front. So expect that money to disappear out of your checking account quickly. That's going to happen, but it's going to get placed in an escrow account with the institution that you're depositing it at, that you're dropping it off at, and it's going to get applied either towards your down payment or your closing costs. And if it's not consumed by one of those, we've actually had clients who have done USDA 0% down loans, who we've also negotiated closing costs with, who have gotten their trust money back at closing once they signed all of the closing paperwork and moved forward with the purchase of the property. So if your earnest money doesn't get consumed with your down payment or closing costs, fees, in other words, that money gets returned to you and put back in your pocket. Okay, so that's the earnest money. That normally happens first. That's checkpoint number 1. Okay, so we've got to get that turned in. Now, there's literature in this contract that states that if we don't get that earnest money turned in on time, let me find it. Hang in there with me. Failure to receive earnest money, it nullifies the contract. Right here, it says on line 162, right here, it says the buyer is in default and the seller has the right to terminate the agreement. Okay, so we've got to make sure that that earnest money gets turned in on time. We've got to meet that deadline first. So when you go under contract, that's going to be the first thing that we focus on together as a team. Okay, we're going to get the earnest money done first. Okay, so we get that turned in. And then at that point, again, to reiterate, okay, let's pause for a minute and give you a break. I believe in pauses just to let you take a breath for a second, right? All right, so you've gotten your earnest money turned in. Again, we've ordered the inspections by now. So the 2 most common inspections in a transaction are a general home inspection and a wood destroying insect and mold remediation inspection. And we've already talked about the cost of the general home inspection. Normally that averages about $500, and it scales up as the property increases in size. So if you've got a 8,000 square foot mansion, that home inspection report's probably going to be upwards of $1,000, maybe $1,200. And then vice versa all the way down. If you've got a 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom 1-bath home, inspection is probably only going to be like maybe $350 or $400. But we're going to average it out at $500. So average about $500 for the general home inspection. Really quick, I want to compliment the home inspector that we work with in Tennessee and also the one that we work with in Georgia, Max Parigi and Jason Lee. If you guys are listening, we love working with you guys. Y'all do a great job. But these guys have drones. They do drone imagery of the roof. They like ground check every receptacle in the house to make sure that the receptacles are working. They actually look and inspect in the attic and underneath the house, the electrical wiring, to see what the condition of the wiring and the pipes are. They even have, infrared where they check the air vents and they can give us like R factors on how well the air is outputting in that particular vent. And they can oftentimes tell if the seal on that air vent has been broken based on the amount of air conditioning airflow output in that particular vent. Isn't that crazy? Technology is insane these days, but that's the reason why you want to work with a really good home inspector, right? Because there are guys out there, I can assure you, that are not doing that stuff. But anyway, so shout out to those guys if y'all are watching this video right now. Thank you guys so much for your thorough reports and doing such a great job. But anyway, so we've got the home inspection, right? We said average $500. Then we've got the wood destroying insect inspection. That's a really big thing in the South, because it's really humid. There's a lot of moisture in the air. It typically rains a lot, right? Everything's really green and lush. So termites and carpenter bees and carpenter ants are a big deal in the Southeast, both in Georgia and in Tennessee, and I would say that and fungus versus mold, we'll talk about in a second. Fungus on the joists in the crawl space and stuff like that comes back, I would say, on probably 40% of the contracts that we do together as a team in both locations. So they're very common, so again, don't freak out. There are things that we can do to remediate the situation. And if it's really bad, if a home inspection report is really bad, or if it's just torn up with termites, rest assured, one of the members on our home expert teams in Georgia or Tennessee will advise you to back out of the contract. I certainly will. We're not just going to tell you to stay under contract because we're trying to earn a paycheck. That's not the way that we do business. So, again, we're on your team and we're fighting for you over here, but just know, if the results come back worse than we expected, and we know that there are other homes on the market that are more conducive for you and better for you, our heads will lay better on the pillow at night knowing that we got you into a better house. So we'll do that and we'll back out of the contract. That's another point right there where we don't want you to feel overwhelmed like you can't get out. We don't want you to feel trapped. You know what I mean? Because you're not. You've got that out as long as you haven't waived the inspections. So just keep that in mind. So you got the inspections right now. Byron, you talked about the cost of the general home inspection. What's the cost of the wood destroying insect and mold inspection? So normally that is in the vicinity of about $100 to $150. It's not bad at all. Okay. But those really give you peace of mind. Now, I told you guys, and I segued a second ago, I kind of referenced, rather, I hinted towards fungus versus mold. Okay. Fungus and mold are alike in a lot of ways, but they're also very different in a lot of ways. To the average eye, if you're not used to seeing it, it could definitely be difficult to distinguish between the two. Typically, what I see, and it varies, guys, remember, because normally fungus is a stage that progresses into mold if it's not treated. And fungus in your crawl space or fungus in your basement, fungus under your house, kind of the same for like mildew inside of your bathroom. If you don't have an air vent that's circulating air in that room, if that moist air is stagnant in that particular room, crawl space, or basement, then what will happen obviously over time is it'll mildew, it'll fungus, and that fungus will eventually turn into mold if it's not treated, right? So with that being said, normally it starts out in a crawl space like a white residue, and then the mold kind of like as it grows and transpires, little black hairs, the white fungus residue turns black and it grows spores, and like it looks like little hairs that are hanging down off of it. And whenever it gets down to that point, it's it's time to get it treated. You know what I mean? It's time to treat it really whenever it's fungus. But fungus is pretty easy to treat. You can get in there and it's pretty cheap. for you to get under there. If you're a hands-on, go get it kind of person, you can suit up with gloves and stuff like that, and you can hit that stuff with bleach. And if you do that once a year, at the end of the summer, whenever fall's rolling in and it's not too hot outside, you can normally kill anything on those joists, just with a little bit of, like a scrub brush that you would scrub Armor All on your tires with, those little wire brushes. You take that with some bleach and water, hit those joists, scrub it, let it dry on its own, and just make sure the crawl space vents are open so that air can circulate through there, because it's the trapped moist air that ends up becoming stagnant air that usually results in fungus or mold. But anyway, I'm delving in. I'm not an inspector, but I'm delving in here to try to give you a little bit of extra information on top of the overview of the home buying process. So I hope it helps and blesses you. But long story short, not a hard thing to treat. Normally, fungus treatment in a concentrated area is less than $1,000. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but normally $500-600 will treat a good solid 200 square foot area in a crawl space that needs to be treated. And it's necessary. And normally, when you hire a professional to do it, they'll do what's called a hot wash or a boracare treatment, where they actually use chemicals that get down into the granules of the wood of the floor joists. And for a long time, it will prevent that fungus and mold from growing back. So that's definitely the best route to go. So do that. So again, we're talking about, termite, moisture, and mold. So once we've done that, sorry, people are shooting fireworks outside. You can tell it's July 11th. They're still celebrating here. So America, baby. Anyway, so so by that point, we've gotten the inspections ordered, right? Now we're waiting on the inspections. You get the inspections back. What do we do next? Okay. Another pause moment. All right. So again, I get in touch with you as a client, and we go over the inspection results together as a team. And I talk with you about what's normal that I see, come back on all of our contracts, and what's not. If there are red flag items, I always go over that with you in detail. Now, the beautiful thing about the inspectors, again, to give those guys credit again, the beautiful thing about their reports is that they normally put a summary in the beginning, and they've got a major, minor, maintenance summary section. Anything that's listed in the major section obviously is something that needs to get done like as soon as possible. It needs to get taken care of. The house isn't going to collapse on itself or anything like that, but it's probably a hot button ticket item that if it's left there for a long period of time, it's going to end up becoming expensive. It's probably not expensive right now, but it will probably get expensive later down the road if it's left that way. So that really gives us some talking points whenever we get together. We'll do a screen share just like I'm doing right now on this video. We'll go over the report together. We'll kind of talk about, line by line what the findings were, and we'll put a game plan together for you and kind of talk about some of the things that you should prioritize on getting taken care of first after you close on the home. Right? There's going to be normal routine maintenance whether you buy new construction or not. There's always going to be things that you need to do to your house, right? So we'll actually put a game plan together, and that's really been helpful for a lot of the single moms and stuff like that we work with. A lot of people who are just not handy whatsoever. I don't mean to single out females, but people who have not been handy. I closed with a first-time home buyer last week, actually, a guy that's not handy at all. He is like a teetotal video gamer and just doesn't work with his hands, and I love him. He's an awesome guy, by the way. I love that guy. But at the same time, he just doesn't know a lot about home and home maintenance and keeping his home up. So we'll go over all that stuff together and put a game plan together for you. Okay. Now, again, you're going to have Google Calendar reminders reminding you of what the deadlines are, and I'll also be communicating with you as well whenever we're running into deadlines. So like we had talked about before, we'll go through the inspections, we'll submit whatever we need to submit, whether that be, a request for repairs, whether that be, a reduction on price, or we're asking for closing costs. We'll start negotiating that, and that will trigger our resolution period that we talked about down here in paragraph 8 under the inspections, here, or in Georgia, same thing. We'll talk about what we negotiated in terms of, dollars or repairs. So we'll negotiate that. We'll have a mutually binding document okay? A repair amendment, or an amendment to the contract that puts that in motion, that is signed by both parties, that legally the seller will have to maintain legally in order for us to be able to close. Okay, so we'll have that in place. Now, something really important, and this is a nugget of information. Again, if you're not working with the Middle TN or Coastal GA Home Expert team and you're at this phase, I cannot tell you how important it is. Okay, listen to me carefully right now. Make sure that repair amendment states, there is literature in that repair amendment that states that items that are replaced are to be replaced with new, not used items. That all repairs that are made are to be done by a licensed and insured professional, and the seller shall be responsible for providing receipts and invoices upon completion of the work that is done on the property. And they've got to provide those receipts and invoices prior to our final walkthrough when you're working with me, because I need that information when we do the final walkthrough so that I can confirm that everything that they said that they were going to do professionally has been done. If it's not, we're not closing. I'm going to extend the closing, or we're going to come up with some sort of dollar negotiation, or we're going to have to punt in that situation. But if I don't know to punt, then I'm not very professional, am I? So I've got to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to best protect you in that situation. And that's one of the ways that we do it. We make sure that the literature in that amendment states verbatim the way that we want those repairs done. And if there are certain items that you want used in the repair, like if I've seen a deck one time have rotten spokes that needed to be replaced. We way back in the day, we had to make sure that the spokes that were replaced were of like kind with the other spokes on the deck, because people would just get in there and just zip a couple of 2x4s in there and then call it a day. So you've got to make sure that you're thorough, and you've got to make sure that you're asking for exactly what you want to ask for, and it's got to get negotiated and then agreed to in writing by both parties. At that point, it becomes the legally binding piece of your contract, and the seller has to uphold it. Okay, really important. So that's your repairs. Okay, so now, again, pause, sip of the sweet tea break. Here we go. All right, sweet tea, I'm in the South. All right, here we go. So where are we at in the process now? Okay, by this point, we're probably a good 10 to 14 days in. We're probably a good 2 weeks in, right? So from there, what happens now? Now I let you know, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, from this point on, it's going to get a little quiet on my part, but I don't want you to feel like I'm not working with you here. I don't want you to feel like I've gotten lazy and slacked off. But really what happens is whenever you're financing from this part, but even if you're just paying cash, the other people that we're working with in the transaction kind of pick up the baton and carry us to closing. So again, that's the reason why you see contract and then mortgage company here. So the mortgage company at that point kind of picks up the baton and runs with it. They're going to have you sign documents. They're going to have you reconfirm your employment and your tax returns and bank statements. You're going to get so tired. You're going to feel like you're sending in the same document 7 times. So don't let that overwhelm you. It's completely normal. It doesn't mean that you're in trouble. It's a normal part of the process. It all happened after 2008 with Dodd-Frank and everything else. Mortgage companies are now required to really be thorough on the lending side. I would more so be nervous if the lending company wasn't asking for all of those things, because if they're not asking for those things, then either somebody's not working on your file and they're dragging their feet, which I see, or they may be having issues with the underwriting and processing of your loan, which is also not good. So when it gets quiet, that's when there's a problem with the mortgage institution. So be prepared for that. The mortgage company picks the baton up and runs with it. Now, make sure that you're asking questions. Speaking of mortgage company, goodness gracious, guys, I almost forgot this. Another thing that we do in the view homes making an offer remember I told you I send the disclosures and stats and comps. Another thing that we do in that part is we send over a mortgage and loan estimate. I get you with your lender, and they give you a quote. I'll send the lender the MLS report for that property that states what the taxes are and everything else, and they'll actually give you an accurate ballpark of what your mortgage is going to look like on that property. That's really important, and I apologize for missing that, but that's definitely in there. Okay, so the mortgage company, again, fast forwarding again back to where we're at. Another one of the ways that you can really, really save money on your mortgage payment is by kind of shopping around on your homeowner's insurance. If you, yeah, you should have car insurance, right? So you call your car insurance provider. Let your car insurance provider know, hey, listen, Mr. Insurance, Mrs. Insurance, I'm going to shop you. I'm going to call like 3 or 4 other companies. Okay. So give me your best premium. Give me your best rate for the best coverage amount. Okay, but shop around, you know what I mean? Go find the best number with the best coverage, the best premium with the best coverage. That's really important. But that is definitely a way for you to save money because if you remember, your mortgage is made up of PITI, which is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay, so all 4 of those are ways, excuse me, that you can save money on your mortgage payment. There are a lot of people that focus specifically on the principal. They focus on sales price, and they think that they've got to get, a house that's $50,000 under, where they need to be, and they're not finding homes with any quality and everything else. They could also save it on taxes and insurance, depending on the area that they're looking in with taxes. If you're looking in the county, for example, versus looking in city, where when you're in city limits, you get charged city and county taxes. If you were looking in the county outside of city limits, you only get taxed on the county taxes. So you would save money there on your property taxes. And then you've got your homeowner's insurance that you could also save money on. So that could make a substantial difference in your mortgage payment. I mean, when I say substantial, 50 to $100 is a pretty big deal. I mean, that's, over the months, if you're making 360 payments on a 30-year, imagine how much money you're saving whenever you do that, right? So take that time at the insurance phase to really make sure you shop and get a good homeowner's insurance quote. Okay. All right. So we're there. Okay. 2 weeks in, you're going through those motions with mortgage. You're also homeowner's insurance shopping. Now it's about time. We're about 2 or 3 weeks in now. It's about time for that appraisal to start coming back. This is one of the last really big checkpoints in your transaction during the home buying process that can go one way or the other. So let's talk about that. Let's just say we're going to use 200,000 because it's a nice round number. Let's just say you're buying a house for 200,000, which is really low, by the way. in all of these markets, $200,000 house is almost non-findable these days. But anyway, $200,000, right? We're under contract for 200,000. If the appraisal comes back at 200,000 or higher, then all I have to do is send an email to the listing agent and say, hey, guess what? Appraisal came back. We're good. Came back at value. Whether it's higher or it's at value, all I say is, hey, the appraisal came back at value. Why do you think I do that? Because I don't want the listing agent to know that the property appraised for 220 or 215 to give them the incentive if something happens, like if we've got to extend our closing date or something like that. I don't want to give them the incentive to back out of the contract and sell it to the next person in line at 215 or 220. I want us to close at 200 and you get instant equity walking into the house. That's the holy grail for a buyer. I always love it when that happens. When we can negotiate a better deal than what the comps are. That is, I love that situation. I live for it. So with that being said, at 200 or higher, you are good. Email gets sent, we're at value. That's all they need to know. They won't know anything else. They never get a copy of the report. Okay. Now, if the appraisal comes back at 190 or 180, if it comes back under our sales price, then in that situation, you and I talk about what you want to do at that point. You've got a couple of options. If you're getting a double whammy with the inspections and you just weren't crazy about that and you've slept on it and you've got some sort of weird feeling in your gut about it, this is an opportunity for you to back out of the contract and go find another house. So remember that. But if we made it this far in, you probably love the house, and I would probably advise you at that point not to freak out and just relax and, like, let's sleep on it, pray on it, and everything else. But the other thing that we can do is we can send the appraisal over to the listing agent, who will then present it to the seller, and then we can try to renegotiate the sales price and get the seller to lower the price to the appraisal value. Okay. Now, the seller doesn't have to do that. The seller can come back and say, our sales price is our sales price. And if you're not going to pay that $10,000 difference or $20,000 difference on the price, then I'm going to terminate the contract and put it back on the market and sell it to somebody who can buy it at that price. Our agreement was our agreement, and we're either going to stick to it or I'm going to find somebody who will. And they have every right to do that. So it's a scary moment for a buyer, because you can definitely lose the house based on things out of your control. In other words, it can come down to the seller wanting to terminate. So you got to be careful in that situation. But again, that's what I'm here for, to negotiate and to try to find win-win situations and everything else. We've gotten creative in the past, believe me, within legal boundaries, of course. But sometimes you got to get a little creative and you got to compromise a little bit, right? So if the appraisal comes back, we send that appraisal over. We try to renegotiate the terms, right? Now, keep in mind that if there are other terms that have been negotiated in the contract, those can get brought back in play at this stage of the contract. So if the seller on a $200,000 contract is paying for $6,000 worth of your title and closing costs, and the appraisal comes back at 190, they can come back to you, the buyer, and say, hey, listen, I'll pay your 190, but we can drop the price to 190, but I'm not paying those $6,000 in closing costs. You're going to be responsible for that. And if you have the reserves to do that, then we can negotiate that. Or you can advise me to be aggressive and say, no, we already agreed on that. We're not changing that. It's not our fault that the appraisal came back low. You guys listed the house too high. So there are different approaches. In other words, it's kind of an art. There are different approaches that you can take in different situations to try to get your point across and get your deal negotiated in the best way possible for you, the client. But with all that being said, those are our appraisal options. Now, what's something else that could potentially happen with the appraisal? I'll give you a second to think. Repairs, right? What if the appraiser comes through and says, Mr. Hatcher, your client's buying a house with a bunch of chipping paint that is on a 1964 house, and if a baby comes in this house and picks and eats that paint up, they could get lead poisoning from it. I don't want to get sued for that. I don't want your mortgage lender to get sued for that, for allowing the buyer to buy the property, right? So they could, in other words, make an appraisal that has what's called a subject to line in the appraisal. On their residential appraisal forms and their official legal residential appraisal forms, they could require repairs to be made. And normally we see those on things like steps that are more than 3 steps that don't have a handrail. Obviously, that can be a hazard. Chipping paint that a baby could pick up and eat and get lead poisoning or choke on, anything that would potentially be a hazard. A cracked exterior window that could, bust in a windstorm and cut somebody. And I know all that stuff seems silly, but at the end of the day, really it's up to the appraiser on what they want to stipulate in the contract. I've also seen them come out and require vapor barriers in a crawl space and some other things that can get a little expensive. And sometimes you have to negotiate that. Sometimes you can't negotiate it. Sometimes it's too expensive for the seller to pay for, and there's just nothing that you can do. Your hands get tied and you get locked, and you got to back out of the contract. So that's another really important part of the appraisal. So at value or above, they never know. Below value, most likely we'll send the report over to them and renegotiate the price and the terms, and then we'll continue trucking right along and we'll get you ready for closing. Okay, so now we're getting really close. And guys, take a breather. We're almost done here. Okay, so by now we're like 3 weeks in. Okay, maybe even 4 weeks in, depending on how busy the appraisers are in your area, right? So from there, the appraisal comes back and gets pushed into processing and underwriting with your lending institution. Okay. And then from there, we know we're starting to get close. So now I'm communicating with the other agent and I'm saying, hey, man, when are you going to get, hey, man, hey, woman, when are you going to get that lockbox and keys off the property once we have, the final clear to close? When is your seller going to be completely moved out of the property? We'll talk about that in a second. We'll start getting ready, in other words, for closing, right? So appraisal comes back, we take care of it. Great. Now, processing and underwriting happens. The lending institution underwrites your file. Okay. If you're cash, the only underwriting that needs to really get done is with the attorney's office or the title company. Now they've got to balance the figures in the transaction, right? So once they do that, they can give you, if you're financing, what's called real loan approval. Once all of the conditions for financing have been met, and trust me, y'all, I've seen my lender, my preferred lender, Michael Shadowin's awesome guy, licensed in Tennessee and Georgia, does most of our residential. I've seen him like explain to me that loans have come back with like 25 stipulations. Steps is what he calls them, 25 steps in the past that had to be met in order for the loan to close. And then most of the time, nothing comes back. Most of the time, he's gotten everything over and everything's clear. Sometimes processing and underwriting just has extra things that they want to just put a final verification on before they close that loan. And normally that happens whenever you're a little more risky as a borrower, so don't take offense to that. If you're a first time home buyer and you don't have a lot of borrowing history, that is definitely something that could happen to you, but it's okay. We'll navigate through it. It's all good. But underwriting will process the file. If you're working with a USDA loan, that is, it's required to have a second set of underwriters, USDA, right? An underwriter that actually works for USDA has to underwrite the file as well, other than the lending institution that's giving you the loan. So both of those parties have to underwrite the loan. And then it has to come back and clear. So once it clears, you get what's called the clear to close. And that is what they call real loan approval. By that point, they have dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. They've looked at all of your information, including your blood samples, and they are giving you real loan approval, right? So now we're getting you ready to close, okay? So now by this point, we should be about a week out, maybe 3 days out from closing, okay? Now, there's a lot of real estate legals that I could tell you about, like there's TRID law. You got to have 72 hours from the clear to close to be able to have enough time to review the accounting statement, the HUD that comes back, the ALTA, the preliminary ALTA that comes back from the attorney or the title's office to make sure all the numbers and everything are confirmed. But just so you know, we should be about 3 days out. And that accounting settlement statement that has all of the debits and credits in the transaction for the buyer and seller gets issued at that point. So the lender has communicated with the attorney or title company and they've squared the numbers up. They're confirming it with the seller's title company. Everybody's making sure that, the taxes and the prorations and the fees and the commissions and all that stuff is all accounted for and it's all accurate. Okay. Now there is human error. Sometimes there are things that need to be corrected, and that's the reason why there are, 25 sets of eyes on this document, making sure that it's right. But they make those clerical fixes, they fix what they need to fix, and then they get that final preliminary out, and then both parties approve it. Once you tell me, hey, looked at it, looks good to me, what do you think about it? You and I communicate about it again together as a team. I tell you, hey, I think it looks good. I don't see anything wrong with it. The numbers look accurate to me. We scheduled the closing at the title company. Have probably already done that by this point, actually. Once we got the appraisal back, we normally do that. We normally do that about a week in advance. But we get the clear to close. We schedule the final walkthrough. Now, I like to do the final walkthrough a day in advance if I can, the day before closing instead of the morning of. That way, if we come across the property and something's not done correctly, that could potentially hold us up from closing, we've got 24 hours to rectify that situation so that you can still close on time. Now, again, pause. Our final walkthrough, very critical, okay? This is the last checkpoint that we've got other than your financing contingency, which lasts all the way up until you sign the paperwork. That we can use to back out of the contract if something hasn't been done legally and the other side, the other party, like the seller in the transaction, hasn't performed, for example. So We like to make sure that the seller has already moved out of the house. Why do you think that's important? Because we want to make sure that nothing gets damaged in the moving process, right? We want to make sure that we don't do the final walkthrough on Thursday and then the sellers move out on Friday morning at 6 a.m. And because they're tired and hadn't had enough coffee, they took that couch and slammed it into the drywall and knocked a 6-inch hole in the wall. You know what I'm saying? So there's a number of things that can happen. I heard a moving truck one time got backed into a brick garage and it busted the brick out of the garage. So there has been some crazy things that have happened. But long story short, with that final walkthrough, we really want to make sure that the seller is already completely moved out of the property. They at least have all of the big furniture, washer, dryer, if that's the case, all of the bed sets and dressers and furniture. All that stuff has to be gone. Okay. Otherwise, I'll tell the listing agent we need to extend the closing date. Or we need to close later in the afternoon. You know what I mean? We close late in the afternoon. The funding takes place the following day after the wire cutoff, but it gives the seller all day leading up to closing to get everything out of the house so that we can do the final walkthrough prior to closing, but we can make sure that nothing's been damaged in the moving process. The other thing too is, if we negotiate repairs and we've got a repair amendment, then I go through there at the final walkthrough like a checklist item, and I make sure that everything on that repair amendment has been done and has been done to professional standards. That's really important as well. So we do that during the final walkthrough as well. Now, from there, we will get ready for closing. So after that, I'll ask for permission to take the key out of the lockbox. If I can, I'll take a key out of the lockbox if the listing agent allows me to do that prior to the closing of the property. Some agents won't allow you to do that. Some sellers don't want you to do that until the property has been officially closed and deed is transferred. But most of the time we can. So I'll take a key. I'll meet you at the closing most of the time, unless I've got some sort of emergency or I'm slammed and I just can't make it. Either way, if I don't sit in with you at the closing, I meet you afterwards or before. You'll see me or you'll see one of our agents on our teams. And we'll come and we'll meet you. And once all of the documents and everything have been signed, we'll give you the keys. We'll give you a card. We'll tell you thank you. We'll give you a hug. And we'll just thank you profusely for allowing us to be a part of the transaction in the first place. Obviously, you guys are blessing us, and we appreciate your business. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of that. So I'll go ahead and thank you now. And if you're not working with us, shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. Think of us in the future. If you're not working with us right now on the transaction, work with us in the future. You'll be glad that you did. But anyway, so you'll go to the title company, the attorney's office, and if you're financing, you're going to sign documents that are like 3 fingers thick. I'm talking like, yeah, bring your icy hot. You're going to need to icy hot your wrists whenever you're done. You're going to be an expert at writing your signature whenever it's all said and done. So you'll sign all of the paperwork. And then from there, normally I'll give you the key after you've signed, with the permission of the listing agent. And you guys can take that key. You can leave from there. You can go ahead and head over to the house. Once the funds take place, like wire transfer through, once the lender has wired the funds to the listing agent's title company or attorney's office and they've received it and it's been confirmed, at that point you've got legal money transfer, and I consider that deed transfer. Now with the state, deed transfer is actually whenever the deed gets recorded with the city or county municipal that you're working with. But whenever the money transfers, at that point you can show a judge in a courtroom that there has been performance that has taken place between both parties. And in my opinion, that's whenever true ownership takes place. So from there, you can take the key, you can go move in. You can go take possession of the property and start getting in there and getting your family ready or getting yourself ready, to sleep there that night, which I hope you get the experience of. But anyway, so let me think for a second. Goodness gracious. Have I missed anything? Look, I tell all of my clients, look, I don't expect you guys to remember all of this. This is a lot. My voice is getting raspy. I've been talking for so long. But this is the home buying process. If there's something that I missed out, I definitely won't miss out whenever we're working together. That stuff just comes naturally. I've been doing it long enough now to where it's second nature. It just comes naturally. And all of our experts, our home experts on both teams, same thing. These guys are well versed. But anyway, again, just to reiterate, by now you've closed on the property, and again, we would love an opportunity to work with you guys. I hope you guys can sense that we're thorough and that we know what we're doing. We try to be as thorough as we can. We know that the legal process is, showing up in a courtroom over a house is not something that anybody wants to do. So we know that if we do a good job on the front end and we're as thorough as possible, we can avoid that at all costs. And we can negotiate our best for you and protect you as well as we possibly can. So last thing that we'll say is thank you so much. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us, watch our blog. We're going to be posting stuff like this through the years. Every so often, we're going to try to educate you guys and make y'all the best home buyers and home sellers, investors, entrepreneurs that we possibly can, because we love and we care about you guys. I know that sounds crazy, but we do. We love and we care about you guys. And we look forward to working with you on our next transaction. So thank you so much for being a part of the home buying process with us. And we look forward to seeing you in your next home. You guys take care.